So this video focuses on Chapter 2, Part 1, which is dealing with classification of plants, names, and also starting the anatomy of plants, talking about the leaves. So the overview of this whole chapter is based on plant classification, light, and the three major plant processes, those of photosynthesis, respiration, and transpiration. So as far as plant classifications go, we can classify them a number of different ways. We can classify them as woody or herbaceous, deciduous or evergreen, annual or perennial or biennial, gymnosperms versus angiosperms, monocots versus dicots, and also by their scientific names, and in some instances also by their common names. We can also classify plants based on color, size, their ability to resist being eaten by other organisms or animals, resistance to diseases, those kinds of things. So I thought it would be useful also to kind of talk about size classifications here as well, and that there are some kind of general rules or guidelines or estimates for how large things are when we say a small tree, for example, but these aren't really fixed rules. Small trees anywhere from 10 to 20 feet, medium trees 25 to 35, and then large trees basically 40 feet plus, and then shrubs, small, medium, and large. And so you can see there's an overlap between large shrubs and small trees, and that's totally fine. In that instance, we would usually say, well, small trees would most likely be single-stemmed, and large shrubs would most likely be multi-stemmed. So woody plants are those that develop woody stems. So they develop true wood. They have secondary growth that develops, and they form a more or less permanent plant structure that usually persists for a long time. Herbaceous plants are soft, green plants that have little or no woody tissue. Typically these are plants that, like is in the case of herbaceous perennials, just die back to the ground every year in the winter, or the annual plants that just simply die out in the winter, and then their stems are kind of soft and succulent, and they decay fairly quickly. Deciduous trees lose their leaves annually, and evergreen plants retain their leaves during the winter, or most of them anyway. Annual plants complete their life cycle in 1 year, which means they can go from being planted as seed to reproducing their own seed in 1 year. And true annuals die after this process happens. Even if the climate is permissive to them staying alive, they still end their life cycle. Perennial plants are those that live through the winter to grow from the same roots the following year, and by classic definition, they live for 3 or more years. So remember that perennial doesn't mean eternal, and there are short-lived perennials and long-lived perennials. Biennial plants take 2 years to complete their life cycle. The first year is an energy storage year where the roots collect carbohydrates, and then after it feels a winter chill, it goes through a wintertime cycle. It takes those carbohydrates or the energy in the roots, and then it produces flowers. So they grow tall and produce their flowers. Now it's worth saying here that sometimes, in many instances actually, when we talk about vegetable gardening, that there are a lot of plants that are botanically perennials, but they are treated as annuals because of our cold winters, and those include things like tomatoes. So those tomato plants can live a very, very long time, but they die at the end of one growing season. So climatically they are annuals, but botanically they are perennials. There's also gymnosperms and angiosperms. Gymnosperms are cone-bearing plants like spruces and firs and junipers. By definition, gymnosperm word means naked seed. So these are seeds that are not encased in any fleshy structure. They're not covered. Angiosperms are covered seeds where the seeds are inside a fruit of some kind. These are further divided into two groups where we have dicots, and these are where the two kind of what we call seed leaves or primary energy storage structures, and then in monocots there's just one of those. We also call dicots broad-leafed plants and monocots narrow-leafed plants, or even easier, the grass family. So monocots includes all of our lawn grasses and ornamental grasses, as well as things like pineapples, irises, daylilies, and even palm trees fit into the monocot category. So this slide just shows some examples of the monocot grasses and a variety of different broadleaf plants. These plants are different enough in their biology that herbicides have been created to deal with them separately. So you can get a selective herbicide that doesn't normally kill grasses but would harm broadleaf plants. So why the funky names? They're not there to make horticulturists appear intelligent. If they were, I'd be using them a lot more. We have invented, or rather smart people have invented, scientific names because common names are unreliable. So if I say red maple, that could conjure up a number of different images of maples with red leaves, or at least red at some part of the year. True red maple is Acer rubrum, and it's actually only red in the fall. So Carolus Linnaeus in the 1700s devised a botanical naming system called a binomial nomenclature system. And binomial means two names, so it's a two-part naming system. And really kind of where he put it all together was in the genus and species at the end of this. So we have kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. And the last three, a family, genus, and species, are the ones that are generally the most useful to us when we talk about horticulture generally. Species are uniquely identified by name, and many species have more than one common name, but in their scientific name there's only one. And so a species name consists of two main parts, a genus or a generic name, plus a specific epithet, which is the second part of the name. And then in a lot of plants there's also a cultivar or variety name that may be added to that to form a three-part name. So families, plant families, are those with similar characteristics. And this is fairly broad. A lot of times in family groups they have similar maybe flower characteristics. And family names always end in this ACE suffix. So for example, maples are in the family Aceraceae. Genus are groups of plants that are genetically related, have similar characteristics, but have more specific characteristics than families. And so this includes like Acer as a genus, which includes a great many species of plants. Of maples, it's the maple genus. Box elder fits into this genus as well. And then species identifies individual unique plants, or unique plants as a group within a genus, and is usually an adjective that describes something about the plant. So Acer palmatum, Japanese maple, the word palmatum implies radiation from a single point, where in this case the veins of the Japanese maple of the leaves radiate out like fingers do on your hand. So then with modern horticulture we also have cultivars, varieties, and hybrids. Now a cultivar is a variant of a species whose characteristics or changes occurred in cultivation. So the word cultivar is short for cultivated variety. So an example of this is Japanese maple, the bloodgood Japanese maple. So that would be Acer palmatum bloodgood. A variety is a variant of a species whose characteristics or changes occurred in the wild. So they didn't happen under the influence of man. They were just discovered in nature. An example of this is the thornless honey locust, Gleditsia triacanthos var inermis, or thornless honey locust. So there is another plant out there called Gleditsia triacanthos that has thorns. And inermis is Latin for unarmed. So it's no spines. And a hybrid is created, or characteristics of that plant are created by crossing two species. For example, like Acer X freemanii autumn blaze is a cross between two different maple species in the Acer genus. And so we usually call this one the autumn blaze maple. And hybrids are always designated by an X in between the generic name and the specific epithet. I want to go back here just for a minute and look at this name here, Acer palmatum bloodgood, and talk briefly about how these names are supposed to be written. So the genus name, the generic name in this case, Acer, is always capitalized and always in italics. You can see that here. And the species name, palmatum, is always lowercase and always in italics. Now it can be underlined if handwritten. That's appropriate. Bloodgood is the cultivar, and that's a proper name, and so it's written in capital, as a capital letter to start with, as proper names should be, and then also in single quotes. Variety is the same way, where the genus and the species names are both in italics with the generic name capitalized, and then inermis should also be underlined or in italics. And with hybrids, both the generic name Acer in this case and Freemanii are in italics, and Autumn Blaze as the proper name is not in italics but is capitalized and in single quotes. So let's talk for a minute about leaves. I mentioned this portion of our discussion of this chapter. We'll talk about leaves. So leaves have two main parts. Their blade, which is the expanded portion of the leaf here, and the petiole, which is the stem-like appendage that holds the leaf erect on the stem and attaches the leaf to the stem. Some leaves are without a petiole, and then we would call them sessile. Leaves are attached at a stem to the stem at a place called a node, as indicated here. So this particular diagram that we're looking at, line drawing, has 1, 2, 3 nodes on it. The principal function of these leaves is to photosynthesize. The outer covering of the leaves is called the epidermis. So that's one cell layer thick right here, the top, and also a similar epidermis at the bottom. Now the upper epidermis, and actually the lower epidermis too, although it's usually not quite as significant, is covered with a cuticle. So the cuticle is waxy, and it is created and made by the epidermis, and it protects the leaf from dehydration. It also keeps environmental pollutants and things out of the leaf, and will also keep herbicides out of leaves if they're not designed to defeat the cuticle. The stomata in the lower surface here, in the lower epidermis, these open and close to allow carbon dioxide into the leaf for photosynthesis, and also for oxygen to diffuse out that is made as a byproduct of photosynthesis. So they open and close for gas exchange. And then the guard cells that are located on either side of the stomata, the stomatal opening, they actually shrink or swell to either open or close the stomata. So as far as identification of different types of leaves and using identification features like this to identify plants, there are a number of different things that we look at. One of the first things we look at is whether or not the leaf is simple or compound. Simple leaves have just one main blade and a petiole. The blade is not divided. A compound leaf is where the blade is divided into smaller subunits, and those can be arranged either in a palmate fashion where they radiate out from or attached at a single location, like in this case a horse chestnut leaf, and they can be arranged in pairs along the leaves in a compound way known as pinnate, and pinnate refers to the arrangement of these pairs. And then those can also be twice divided, or what we call double pinnately compound leaves, as seen here. And honey locust is actually a good example of a plant that has mainly pinnately compound leaves, but also many plants have a good portion of doubly pinnately compound leaves as well, and that's just normal genetic variation. Compound pinnate leaves may also be what are called odd or even. So they're considered odd pinnate if they end in a single leaflet like this one does here, or they're even pinnate if they end in a pair, as if this leaflet wasn't there at the top. That would be even pinnate. So here's an example here on the left of Kentucky coffee tree showing the pinnately compound leaf or twice pinnately compound leaf. And then here on the right is catalpa showing us one large simple leaf. Gymnosperms or cone-bearing plants also have different leaf types. The ones we're most familiar with probably are pines and firs and spruces, where they have needle-like leaves. But junipers and arborvitae and other types of gymnosperms may have scale-like leaves, which in this case can be picked apart just like this, or they may be awl-like and be sharp and spiny. So this is a picture of some pine needles that are radiating out here from limber pine. Leaves are also identified by their shape: lanceolate, linear, cordate or heart-shaped, elliptical, or ovate. And there's many others. There's many others. This picture here is of ginkgo leaves. And ginkgo leaves actually have their own shape. They're the only plant that really has a leaf shape like this, and it's just simply called a fan shape, or sometimes it's called a dichotomous shape. Also, we categorize them by how their tips are shaped, whether they're pointy or rounded, and also the bases. And we're also categorize them based on where the leaves are arranged on the stems. Arranged as a rosette here, where all the leaves kind of come out at a common location. Alternate, where the leaves alternate back and forth from one side of the stem to the other. And then opposite, where the leaves are, two or more leaves are in pairs, and those pairs then alternate, but we call those opposite leaf arrangements. And then whorled, which is where there's three or more leaves at a node, all attached at the same node, and there can be on some plants maybe up to like 50 of those leaves on one node. Leaf margins are also important identifiers, as well as leaf venation. And so we can categorize veins as being parallel, which means they run rather parallel to the edge or the margin of the leaf blade. They're pinnate, as this one is here, like elm. Remember that pinnate is just simply an arrangement, so the veins can be arranged pinnately as can leaflets on a leaf. And then palmate here, where we have these major veins radiating out through each lobe from a common location. So here's a real life maple leaf here, picture of it, showing those major veins all connecting here at this location where the petiole and the blade meet. Other terms and ways that we can identify leaves is with some of these Latin terms. Glabrous, meaning without hair. Glaucous, meaning that it has basically, it's covered with wax, which is usually white or blue, like blue spruce. Or in the picture here on the right, this is a blue Atlas cedar. And so if we can actually rub the wax off, and underneath then those needles are very green. Lustrous, pubescent, or covered with hair. Viscid, which is sticky or gummy like petunias.